بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
So now the next concept we'll try to understand, there is something called DHCP Relay Agent. Now this is typically used when the DHCP server is on one subnet. Like take an example in our lab scenarios, what we did, we configured this as a DHCP server, which is responsible for providing the IP address to the clients. So it's assigning the IP address to the VLAN 10 and the VLAN 20. And also we have configured this is assigning the IP address to the other remote client as well. We created 3 different pools. And if you just wanted to quickly verify, I can even show you the configurations here, where I can go and view the command called show run section DHCP, where we have configured the pool for VLAN 10, VLAN 20, and for the WAN interface. So this is going to work fine as long as the client and the DHCP server. So this is the DHCP server and this is the client. As long as they are connected to each other in the same subnet, that's really good. But now the problem is, what if I want to use the same DHCP server? Like in this example, I want to use the same DHCP server, which is in my head office. Let's assume this is my head office, which is assigning the IP address to these devices, the VLANs. And the same DHCP server, I want to assign the IP address to the remote LAN also. Now, this is the remote LAN, which is not on the same subnet. Now, you have a client in a remote branch office. Let's say this is my branch office 1, and I want the head office to be able to provide the IP address to the client on the remote subnet. Now, if you just want, you can just check it out. So what I'll do is I'll try to set up. Anyway, I'll directly show you it's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work because of the limitations. So if you remember, let's try to understand some of the limitations with DHCP across multiple subnets. And of course, the solution is the DHCP Relay Agent or IP helper address. So one of the main limitation is the broadcast limitation. So if you take an example, this is my company network and I have the DHCP server somewhere here. Let's assume that I'm going to maintain one DHCP server here, somewhere here, okay? Now this DHCP server will be able to assign the IP address to everyone within the same subnet. That's good. But I want the same DHCP server will also be assigning the IP address to this LAN, as well as this LAN, as well as this LAN, as well as you have many VLANs here. You can see there is a VLAN 10, VLAN 20, VLAN 30, VLAN 40 as well. Now, what will happen whenever a client sends a broadcast? Like if you take this simple example, okay, this is going to be much easier to understand as it is a very small topology. Now, whenever this client says, I want to get the IP from the DHCP server, we know that it will send out a broadcast request. So what it will do? It will send a broadcast request. So the broadcast request goes to every device within the LAN, including this router. So normally, whenever a client sends a broadcast request, I'm expecting this broadcast request should reach the DHCP server, or the DHCP server should listen to the broadcast request, then only it will be able to reply back. But as the DHCP server is on a different subnet, DHCP server is somewhere, and the client is somewhere on a different network, the client will send a broadcast. The broadcast goes within the LAN. Within the LAN or within the VLAN, it will never reach the DHCP server because the DHCP server is on a different subnet. Okay. So the main problem is the broadcast limitation is only within the same VLAN or the same LAN, as the broadcast request will not go to the or reach the DHCP server. So this way, it will fail to get the IP address because there is no way you can get the IP unless you send your request to the DHCP server. So other options, what you have to do, you have to either use a manual IPs. That is one option. You can say, okay, I have the DHCP server I'm going to use for this network. For the remaining network, I'll say a static IP. That is one option. Or you can have a separate DHCP server in each and every LAN. So again, these are not practically scalable because having a static IP is not recommended. And again, having a separate DHCP for each and every VLAN, each and every LAN is also not scalable. And especially if you have thousands of departments, or if you have 20 departments maintaining 20 DHCP servers, it's not really a scalable, because managing multiple DHCP servers in each and every network will be very difficult, and it's considering that, that's really not a good option. So what is the option? We can use a relay agent. So the solution is relay agent. And the relay agent, what will happen is simple. The client will send out a broadcast request. The router will listen to that broadcast request. So the broadcast request will go to everyone, of course. What I can do is I'll go to this interface F0 by 0. On this interface F0 by 0, I'll simply configure one command, IP helper address, whatever the IP address of the DHCP server. I have to tell the IP, simple thing. So what this means is I'm saying that whenever this interface receives a DHCP broadcast, I can tell my router to forward this broadcast to the DHCP server wherever it is as a unicast. Okay, and of course, the prerequisite, you need to have the routing capability at the backend to be able to reach the DHCP server. So the simple thing, the request is coming from the client for the discover message, and the router or the gateway will listen to that message, and it will forward this to the DHCP server as a unicast. So the client will send a broadcast, and the router will sending that as a unicast, assuming you have a routing, reachability, all those things. Okay, that's the same thing. Okay, similar diagram you can see here also. You have the client sends a broadcast request. The broadcast, it will go to the router, and I'm going to configure the helper address, which is going to send a DHCP unicast request as a unicast request to the DHCP server. The same thing here. Okay, so what is DHCP Relay Agent? Relay Agent is an option which is going to forward the broadcast, and it's going to support multiple subnets, which means I can just have one DHCP server in the head office, and it is assigning the IP address to many branch offices. All the branch offices can get an IP address from a single DHCP server set up across multiple VLANs or across multiple subnets, across multiple branches you can have. Okay, so that's the scalability what it provides. And the main advantage, it will reduce the need of multiple DHCP servers. So we don't need a separate DHCP servers, because it is going to work for multiple networks. And this way we can have a scalable network. You can have hundreds of departments. You can still have one DHCP server doing the job. Of course, it will reduce the cost as well, because we are not maintaining a separate DHCP server again. So what it is going to do, it's going to forward the broadcast request. So let's try to implement the same lab here as per this topology. Okay, the continuation we can say. So I'm going to use this continuation topology here, which is going to use. So already it is pre-configured with these two subnets, and also these are the clients which are getting the IP address from the DHCP server. And I'm expecting the same to be done for the remote network as well. So for this device, for this client. And this client is using 192.168.1. Subnet. That's a subnet. So before that, we need to do some few configurations. The first thing is the interface. You need to have the static IP. So this interface must have a static IP. So in order to do that, so we'll go back to my topology, which is already connected here. I already connected these devices. I'll go to this router. We'll start from the right side part. Okay, so the PC client, we don't need to do anything. So the router part, we do have the interface F0 by 0. I'm going to assign the gateway address as 1.100, and on the same interface, I'm going to say relay helper address. Okay, so I need to, if you want, I can just simply configure this. What is the IP address of the DHCP server? 10.0.0.2. So on the same interface, I'm giving the IP, and also I'm going to say interface F0 by 0 IP helper address, and I have to give the IP address of the DHCP server. So this is going to be my DHCP server IP, which means this is my DHCP server and this is the IP address of the DHCP server. Okay. But again, the question is, in order to send the unicast, that DHCP server IP should be reachable. So if it is reachable, it can send. But now the question is not just this device. This network also should be reachable. So basically, you have to implement the routing as well between these two, or you can create the pool. The other thing, you need to create the pool as well. So what generally we do is, most likely you will not have the same network, so we'll also do the routing. We'll advertise like the 1 dot network in the LAN, and we also advertise the 10 dot network in the WAN on the router. So also what we have to do, we have to implement the routing protocol, because if the client and the DHCP, if they're on different subnet, there must be a routing also configured, and that's what we are doing. Additionally, I have to go to the L3 switch or the DHCP server. Also, we have to configure the routing. So I'm using EHRP. You can also use any other. So make sure that in the L3 switches, by default, the routing is disabled. So we have to give the command called IP routing before we enable the routing and advertise the protocol. You can use OSPF, we can use static, or you can use any of the routing. It's up to you. The 10 dot network and advertising the LAN. LAN is not required, but generally we do it for the routing purpose. Now we do have the routing as well. So which means now the routing is also configured. Now once we do the configuration, we need to create a pool. Also it's required. So we need to go to the switch, create a pool for the remote network. IP DHCP pool. This is for LAN 2. Let's say 172.16.1 dot subnet. 255.255.255.0. The default router is 172.16.1.100. So we have to give the default router based on this subnet. This is my default gateway here, and this is my client. And assuming that there is a DNS server as well on 1.1, and I'm going to exclude 172.16.1.1 because that is my DHCP server, DNS server, and 1.100 is my gateway. And if you have any other exclusions, you can just add. I'm going to randomly exclude 172.16.1.20 as well. Okay, up to 20, which means I'm expecting the IPs should be given from 21, 22 like that. I think I'm done with the configuration. So just to quickly review, this client will be getting the IP dynamically. You must have a static IP here. And on this interface, you must configure the helper command, which is a DHCP Relay Agent command. So it will receive, this interface receives the DHCP broadcast. It is going to send out a unicast to that. Now to send the unicast, again, the routing is required. So we enable the routing. And the other thing, when the DHCP server receives the request, it has to have the pool. So we also created the pool and we excluded the addresses. So if you see the process, accordingly, you can go step by step and configure, or you can just make your own steps to configure. So most likely, I assume I'm done with the configuration. So it's time to verify. So there are many clients here. I have 4 computers. Any one will be sufficient for me to verify. If everything is okay, I must be getting the IP. You can see I'm getting an IP 1.21 here. Let's do the same thing on the other devices as well. 1.22 and the same thing 1.23. So all the devices getting the IP, and I can go to the switch and I can just go and say show IP DHCP bindings. So now you can see these are the 3 devices which gets the IP address, based on the subnet, because now the DHCP server is configured with many things like again, this is more kind of a production network, because if you have multiple LANs, you will have multiple pools like 10, 20, WAN, and the remote LAN. So there are total 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now you can have even more as well. And even you can add, if you want, you can just elaborate this topology a little bit more and you can add one more router, and you can add some computers, and you can do the same thing here as well. Here also you can do the same thing, same configuration. So maybe 172.16.2 network or some other network. You can just try and elaborate, and you can expand your topology and verify. That's how you expertise. Okay. So relay agent is one of the important concept you need to understand, because most of the time in the production network, mostly the DHCP, maybe you have a dedicated DHCP server which is running a Windows machine, but still it's your job to configure this config, because this is done on the router or on the multi-layer switch, wherever it is. So instead of, let's say if it is a multi-layer switch, let's say instead of this, then you have to configure the same command on the interface, VLAN interface, because that is going to be my SVI. So interface VLAN 10. If you have multiple VLANs, so you have to add this command for the same thing on the VLAN 20 also. So you just need to try and elaborate and do the things. So you need to simulate a few scenarios, and we need to do the same way. Okay. So here, just for the variation, I have added the router. You can add multi-layer switch, and you can just go ahead and verify the same thing here.